How is it that we find ourselves surrounded by such complexity, such elegance?
The genes of you and me, the genes of you and me, we're all made of DNA. We're all made of the same chemical DNA. We're all made of DNA.
Hi, you're listening to DNA Today, a multi-award winning podcast and radio show where we discover new advances in the world of genetics. From genetic technology like CRISPR to rare diseases to new research. For over a decade, DNA Today has brought you the voices of leaders in genetics in over 200 episodes. For the past 3 years, DNA Today has won the People's Choice Best Science and Medicine Podcast Award. I'm Kira Deneen. I'm a certified genetic counselor and your host. This conference was one for the book. So in this episode, we're going to be talking about the 43rd National Society of Genetic Counselors annual conference that took place in New Orleans this year. And I have to say, I am sitting here blown away by this sense of community I'm feeling post-conference. And yes, you can tell I was doing a lot of talking over the conference. I'm starting to lose my voice a bit. It's way lower than normal, but I swear, it's Kira. But it was incredible to be surrounded by so many like-minded people this week. I loved reconnecting with guests and sponsors of the show, classmates, and meeting a ton of new people. I think this year I met way more new people than I did in prior conferences. And it continues to be very surreal going to these conferences, especially NSGC, and talking to people who've been listening to the show, especially for a few years. As you can imagine, it's a lot of work producing a weekly podcast. So for almost 3 years now, we've been releasing this as a weekly show and have not missed a Friday since we started doing that in early 2022. Except for this week. So the conference ended on Saturday, and normally I would have edited the episode and released it, an hour or two after the conference ended. But I gotta admit, I wanted to catch some more jazz on Frenchman Street and Bourbon Street before I left. So I've been hosting and producing the show since 2012. So this month actually marks our 12th year anniversary birthday. So it was cool for NSGC to coincide with that because podcasting can feel very one-sided. So obviously I do a lot of interviews on the show, mostly virtual, but it just felt so good to actually talk to people and for people to be like, oh my gosh, I've listened to you over the years and coming up and mentioning that to me. So if you ever see me, please, I love being able to meet people and kind of getting your feedback on the show, what you've enjoyed, what topics we don't cover enough or have never covered. And if we didn't get to meet because maybe you're at the conference and we didn't end up crossing paths or you weren't able to go to the conference, email me, info@dnatoday.com. I would love to connect with you, hear what you like about the show. Any suggestions you have, you can also add me on LinkedIn, Kira Deneen, pretty Googleable, LinkedInable. But anyway, so I am just very blown away and feeling really great just coming back from the conference. Obviously very tired, but such a happy tired. All right, enough sappiness. So in this year's recap episode, I chatted with attendees about their favorite part of the conference. And then we end with a deeper dive on one of the first sessions. It was about PGTM. That was moderated by my friend Courtney Studwell. We went to UConn together in our undergrad days. And I caught up with my friend Joe after the session. We were classmates at Sarah Lawrence to debrief about the session and what we learned. And so it was very, all these chats that you'll hear in this episode, it's very informal. So it was very fun. And the interviews and kind of, mini interviews were done at the conference. So there is a bit of background noise, but as I was editing, I was like, I think this adds a little bit of ambiance and captures the conference center environment. So hopefully you enjoy it. Let me know how you like this recap episode because we've been doing recap episodes for 5 years now for NSGC. Anyway, thank you so much. My heart is so full and I'm really excited for the future of our field. But let's get to what people thought about at the NSGC conference.
Hello, my name is Grace Farrell. I'm a second-year genetic counseling student at the Pitt program, and this is my first time attending NSGC, as many of the other people who talk. One of my favorite things has been just having everyone together provides the opportunity for program directors to have alumni lunches. So that was one of the things that we were able to do at Pitt, and that was such a great way to connect in person with alumni. And I even got to meet one of the past chairs of the metabolic SIG, and that was one of my strong interests. And so she was able to invite me to a happy hour where I was connected to even more members. And so it was just a great example of how connecting through NSGC is just abundant, and it's been one of my favorite parts.
That is amazing. I love the networking aspect, as you guys can tell, right? Because I've just loved meeting so many people. And I think that's the best part, being in person. There were 2 years that NSGC was fully remote, and they did as best as they could with what they had to work with to make networking happen. And I was actually surprised how much I was able to do, but there's, to me, nothing like in person. I think especially as someone that works from home, it's so much better to meet people in person, and it's just, it's amazing. Yeah, thank you.
Of course. Hello, I'm Megan Piekowitz. I'm a second-year genetic counseling student and PH dual degree at the University of Pittsburgh. This is my first NSGC conference, and the most exciting and enjoyable part to me was handing out the friendship bracelets that our cohort made. It was a tradition that the second years of last year at the Pitt program started, and I thought it was a great way to start to network and create a conversation with new people.
And you guys made me one. And I was so excited. I was like, oh, there's one. Like, what do I get? And you're like, oh, it's DNA Today. And
It
I'm
is
like,
for
that's
you.
amazing.
Yes.
Yes. I think that was the first Instagram post after posting that Colleen, the president, was speaking and stuff. That was like my first one that I posted. But yeah, it's so exciting. And I'm a Swiftie. So there was an extra level of like, this is amazing. Like genetics and kind of a Swiftie moment. So yeah, love
Even
that.
better.
Yes.
Yep.
My name is Alejandra Bernal. I am a second-year student at the University of Pittsburgh, and this is my first time at NSGC, and I love the possibility to meet with other minority students. And a big shout out to La Casita, is an affinity group for Hispanic students and recent grads.
That is amazing. What are some things that you got out of it, of just meeting with other people and just having the group?
As a sense of community, of sharing experiences that may be unique, and feeling the support and just laughing sometimes of share things.
And hopefully it's like connection you made this trip and this conference that will continue on. You're like, oh, I could reach out to this person and that person, and like hopefully it's the first of many.
Yes, it's very curious because with some people we met virtually or through Zoom, and we were hugging when we met here, like, hi, how are you? Like we knew each other, so it was very warm.
That is amazing. I love that.
My name is Julia Volpe, and I'm at the Baylor College of Medicine in my second year. My favorite thing at NSGC has been seeing all the research done by genetic counselors. I come from a strong research background, and I'm really passionate about it, so seeing work GCs are doing, seeing work industry side is doing has been really inspiring, as well as just seeing all the different perspectives and experiences that GCs are sharing here, especially related to disability or religion, and I feel like I've learned so much about cultural competency and how they shape their practice, and hopefully how I'll shape mine in the future.
Yeah, it's exciting. I think when I think about genetic counselors and research, Journal of Genetic Counseling comes to mind, and that they launched a new podcast this year, and I was able to be part of that launch, and that was really, really awesome to be part of the team. And so have to give a shout out to DNA Dialogues for people to check out that show. We've done some episode drops in our feed.
Okay,
but
I'll check it out.
Yeah, and the research side is so interesting because like that's not something I've ever done, so that's stuff that I like learning about and like walking through all the posters.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. And there are different
talking.
topics shaped over there, so it's been cool to see like the psychology ones, the neurology ones, the cardio ones, and kind of find your niche in there.
Going back to what you said about so many different topics, I think I've been to 5 NSGCs now because I started as a second year, and there were some virtual years in there, like I was saying earlier, and it seems like this year has more out-of-the-box presentations than other years in a really good way, of like just different perspectives. Like there was the one that talked about, had genetic counselors from different areas of the world.
Yeah.
And then, I don't know, there's just been so many more interesting ones of topics I wouldn't think about at first when it's like, oh, a genetic counseling conference. So it's been a little bit more, what is the phrase, expanding the horizon? What is it?
Going beyond the horizon?
Beyond the horizon. Thank you. I've been corrected. Thank you. So I think that's fitting. They did a good job with the theme.
I've gone to a lot of different research conferences pre-GC world, and NSGC has been so accessible. Like they really make it so anyone, even a student, can come and understand what the topic is. And I feel like that's been so inviting and welcoming as a community and as a conference, as opposed to some raw science conferences that are just like way over your head.
I've been to some that are like more one-day conferences and I'm like, yeah, this is so over my head, but very cool to be surrounded by cool people. And I'll just sit here and kind of, like nod. Yeah,
exactly. So it's been cool.
Hi, my name is Gabrielle Galden. I am a second-year genetic counseling student at the University of Pittsburgh, and this is also my first NSGC. One of the most favorite things that I've done so far is the Tinda session that really explored different counseling considerations for different religions. I thought that was super interesting, and there were a lot of things that I just hadn't considered before, and it was really great to learn from people who practice those religions as well as genetic counseling.
Yeah, I think it's interesting when you look at people that are in science and are scientists and counselors, like, I think we're all scientists, right, in that way, but how their religion can not conflict with their science, but actually kind of partner with it, and it enhances it. Dr. Francis Collins, the old director of the NIH, he has this new book out that we just did an episode about, The Road to Wisdom, and he talks about that concept. So unfortunately, I couldn't go to that session, so I'm really hoping it was recorded because I starred that one. But yeah, so you got a lot out of it just in terms of that perspective.
Yeah, it was great to hear different parts of their religion. So they explained different aspects of their religion, as well as certain things that would really be part of either treatment decisions or including their family and decision making, things like that are integral to their experience as someone who practices that religion. And it just was super helpful for my understanding going forward in this field.
And when we have patients that have different cultural views and religion and how that may change what kind of treatment looks like for them or testing, and I think that is a very useful part, but then just an appreciation, like you said, is really interesting.
Absolutely.
Hey, my name is Jerome Durger. I'm a second-year genetic counseling MPH dual degree student at the University of Pittsburgh. This is my first NSGC, and today's session, The Cure, talking about sickle cell disease and the CRISPR treatments that are coming down the pipeline, was phenomenal. I've been following actually Victoria Gray's story for a long time, ever since the first NPR article about it. While I was getting my prerequisites, because I didn't study science in my undergraduate schooling, that was a big motivator for me. And being able to see in real time the technology and its impact it's having on folks is truly incredible. But I really appreciated today's panel because they really dug into the harms that sickle cell patients have endured in our healthcare system, some of the preconceptions. And I just hope that as a career, as a field, that we continue to elevate those voices. I think it's just so vital to hear from people's lived experiences and to hopefully go into the future a little wiser and maybe try not to repeat the same mistakes of the past. So that was super encouraging to see that talk and panel discussion as opposed to a lecture. I thought was super valuable.
Yeah, I think the panel set up for when I've seen those ends up being much more engaging in that way, especially when it's a topic like that. And Victoria Gray was on our show earlier this year, so 288. I'll put it in the show notes. I might be wrong. But it was a 2-part episode and just talking about the medical racism that she has gone through. And then you just think about, this is one person. And then what about everybody else that has sickle cell that has experienced this, and even outside of the U.S.? And I think it's just, and she's so open and well-spoken, and she is just such a great person, I feel like, to be, she's on NPR, Good Morning America. She's been on really big platforms, and I'm so glad that she has those skills and feels open enough to share that with people, because it's going to have such a big impact. And she's already inspired others to do the CRISPR treatment. And so we've already seen, people are like, I did it because Victoria Gray was on this and talked about it, and I was like, now I want to do it.
Totally.
So yeah, it's great. And the class above me, Rebecca Hutchinson, was part of my genetic counseling crew. So,
great.
Yeah, so very, very proud of her for being able to do that. So,
yeah, and bringing representation
very
as a
much
genetic
so.
counselor
And
as
Barbara Harrison was part of that as well,
awesome.
right? Yeah, so yeah, definitely. So yeah, some pretty big names in genetic counseling as well there.
Yeah, really cool.
My name is Annette. I go to Sarah Lawrence, and what I've learned is that as students and participants in various genetic counseling programs, we often find ourselves in competitions for match and job placements. However, when we arrive at NSGC, we discover a welcoming community united by a common purpose. We come together as one, and this is a space where we can find support and collaborative to enhance patient care.
It's really great that even though we see that the job market is not so great right now, we'll be honest, right? There was that stat that 29% of the graduating class in May 2024 this year had a job at the time. But to be able to just see the camaraderie and just also the innovation behind it and just how genetic counselors can use their skills in other ways, I think is really key. Genetic counselors can become sales reps for companies, can work in marketing, so many other types of areas. And I think that's what a lot of students have got out of it, like yourself. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm very excited. We have not recorded before. I'm recording with my classmate, Joe. Joe, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes. Hi, my name is Joe. I'm a prenatal genetic counselor, mostly servicing patients from the Upper East Side of Manhattan. And I'm excited to just kind of chat about what we saw at this really cool session.
Yeah, so we're going to be talking about, I'll give the full name of the session. This was the first full day of the conference. It was called Just Because We Can, Should We? Examining PGT through the lens of ableism, access, and clinical actionability. And this was led and moderated by Courtney Studwell. For those that don't know, I'm also a prenatal genetic counselor. I service patients in the Stamford, Connecticut area, so really close to where Joe works. And yeah, there was a lot that we both don't work in fertility, but a lot of fertility ends up affecting us because we end up seeing those patients.
100%. They end up being our patients after. You know, when things are successful, we see them after. So a lot of this stuff, I'll do it every single day. It's really interesting for us to know.
For us, a lot of times, patients are asking questions that maybe they asked at the time but kind of forgot in terms of, well, what was included in my PGTA? Like, what was that embryo screening?
Absolutely.
And oftentimes they get confused in terms of like, well, we already did all the genetic testing. We don't need to do that. Does that happen with you with patients?
Absolutely. Patients more so are saying, well, why am I meeting with you? I already did all of the genetic testing and I did this whole thing and I did everything. I say, yes, but these things are screening, right? And I'm sure your genetic counselor at your IVF clinic told you that you would probably have to confirm through invasive testing. But there's been some time between that first initial appointment with them and this appointment with me. So it's just kind of reminding them, yes, we still need to confirm.
And especially if they did testing, froze the embryos, used it years later, they're not going to remember.
100%.
Do you know sessions you had as a patient meeting with a healthcare provider what they told you 2 years ago?
Never.
So I think we often serve that role of reminding them and kind of re-explaining and explaining what is included and what isn't. And for people that aren't as familiar with PGT, there's really three main types. So when people say PGT, usually they're referring to PGTA, which stands for aneuploidy, so that's the extra missing chromosomes. And then there's SR for structural rearrangements, like the balanced translocations or unbalanced is usually what we're focused on, and seeing what embryos have that and could have medical complications. But really what this session focused on was PGT-M for monogenic. And I think we were chatting earlier when we were kind of walking to the convention center today that we both didn't know too much about how it works in the UK because we're so, not only US, but we're so New York.
We're so New York.
We're so New York. I know I practice in Connecticut, but we're like 10 minutes from the line,
Tri-state
people.
Tri-state area.
And went to school at Sarah Lawrence.
Yes.
That's how we know each other. I
Yes.
should have said that at the beginning. But yeah, so what surprised you about how it works in the UK versus how it works in the US for us?
Oh, well, I just think it's just that they have guidelines.
You're like, here's a simple question. There's regulation.
There's regulation there and none here. And I think it's so interesting because they have such a healthcare system that is with everyone, that there has to be some sort of governing body to approve these things that people would like for their healthcare. So I think that the fact that they have a guideline and that their guidelines are phenotype based, which was really interesting to me because you would think that it would more so be condition based or gene based, but they're really looking at
like situations almost.
Yes, exactly. More so looking at how this condition would affect different families and outcome and how much money this condition would cost the entirety of their population. So the entirety of their population has to approve it first, which, yeah, it was really, really interesting coming from America, New York, where we don't have any guidelines, really. Yeah, that kind of socialized like healthcare where everybody has to say yes is really interesting. So
it is, and it's something that it's like, I think for us, we hear a little bit more how things work in Canada as opposed to the UK, especially because in our class we had, 4 or 5 Canadians, the Canadian crew. Yeah. I think for us, if we do know what's happening in other countries, it might be more Canada, Mexico. And it was interesting on one of the slides that Mexico has they're the most unregulated, thank you. Like they're just out there.
Yeah.
It's like kind of it seems like anything goes, which is interesting. And there's that concept of like medical tourism where people will go to other countries to do things and then come back to their home country. And I wonder how often that happens in the UK. If a family is basically denied for a reason to do embryo screening if they'll be like, you know what, let's go to a different country. But I don't remember them mentioning that, but I could have been writing something else down during it.
No, but I think that that's so interesting because I feel like in the US, it's more so accepted to go to other countries to do XYZ things. And especially here in the US, maybe with our patients more so, if a patient wants to do something, they will do it, regardless of what we say, what the guidelines say, things like this. So I'm sure that that does happen in the UK, but I think, and I don't know really their culture, but I think that if the governing body says no, maybe the majority of those patients would say, okay, well, we can move forward with our embryo retrieval transplant.
Yeah, we're just going to go follow with whatever the UK says we can do.
Especially because it's such a long process. I mean, they said that it takes, they say like 75 days for approval to come in when there's a new phenotype.
And anything in prenatal, like time is of the essence for us in prenatal.
100%.
And fertility, it is as well, not as much. Like before someone actually conceives in whatever way they do, in fertility that's going to be not natural conception usually, unless they're doing medical assisted kind of conception, medication assisted. But it is interesting that it's like that's how long it can take. And with that, I thought it was interesting that some of the phrasing is like, we will accept being able to screen embryos for serious conditions.
Right.
But what I think is a serious condition might be different from what you think, Joe, is a serious condition.
100%. And I like that during the talk, they highlighted that what they consider serious, nobody ever really wrote down.
Yeah, you have to define that.
You have to define that. So I think with each phenotype, their governing body takes that into account each time, which I thought was interesting. There's not one person that's saying, this is what's serious, this is something that reduces life expectancy, right? This is what's serious, someone has an intellectual disability, right?
And it's like, well, what extent? Is it a mild intellectual disability? More profound?
Right.
And yeah, to define that, and even like some things are more straightforward. So there was a really great slide, which we'll include in the show notes. So you guys can go to dnatoday.com and click on this episode to look at that. And it was interesting that they broke it down into clear indications, possible indications, and not indicated.
Right.
But it is tough. Like some of the more clear ones at this point would be Tay-Sachs. That's a childhood condition where it is life limiting, and so we have kiddos pass away from this. So most people, if we went off and went around the convention center, I mean that's not going to be reflective of the U.S. population because genetic counselors were a certain wonderful breed. But most people, I think, would say, oh, that's terrible. Yes, we should allow people to choose an embryo that will not develop Tay-Sachs.
Absolutely.
And pass away, before they're able to reach elementary school.
Exactly.
And the other part, too, is that right now, like sickle cell disease is one that's also clear.
Right.
That they're like, yep, that's an indication.
Right.
But someone raised an interesting point during the talk of, well, will this change with the advent of, now we have CRISPR FDA approved for sickle cell, and that has been really helpful for some people. We interviewed Victoria Gray earlier in the year, and she's the first person ever to be treated with CRISPR and has had no symptoms of sickle cell since. So basically a cure. That's not what everyone experiences.
Right.
But do you think that's going to change if more and more people are able to access this treatment for sickle cell? Are they going to say, well, now you can treat for it, so why should we screen for it?
Yeah, it's really interesting, and I'm glad that they brought that up during the conference.
because I didn't think of it
I
at
didn't think
first.
about that, because things that are more so in our clear indication of like, let's go through with PGT can move into our kind of possible indication. Even when I'm thinking about cystic fibrosis, right? Like,
that's very similar. It used to be a deadly childhood condition.
Exactly, and now our life expectancy is getting into our 50s, 60s, 70s. So is this more so something that we think about in terms of an HBOC condition, where it's more so adult onset? Or is this more so something we're thinking about childhood onset and symptoms? These conditions are kind of changing as well as we're talking about them. So that's a really good point that they brought up during the conference too.
Yeah.
Something to think about. But that's why in the US, and our guidelines are kind of so each PGT lab can decide, that's where things kind of get into our gray area. And us as genetic counselors hate gray areas.
Yes.
So it's really interesting for us to kind of parse out what is a black and what is a white and what is in the middle.
Yes, definitely. And I think another interesting thing that I starred in my notes was a reminder for all genetic counselors. And I think pediatric and prenatal, so us and peds genetic counselors, the case review is always required to confirm that we can even do PGTM, like if it's feasible.
Right.
But then, okay, if we can do it, will a lab actually allow it to be done? Like, or a fertility center, the lab they use, will they accept that? And if they say no, I mean, I haven't been in this position, I haven't pursued parenthood yet, but I guess if one says no, do you just keep shopping around? Like, that kind of seems to be what some people do.
Right, and a lot of people have success with shopping around too, which is also very interesting. And clinics have their own advisory ethics board, which the clinic will say, no, we are not going to.
We're drawing a line here.
We're drawing this line, and so the patient will just say, okay, well, I'm going to take my embryos and I'm going to go somewhere else. So that's kind of where the gray area comes in different clinics and different PGT labs kind of deciding what their line in the sand is. And I feel like with our patient population, like I said before, if they want to do it, they will find a way.
Yeah, many people have the means. Like you said, you're upper Manhattan, and I have a mix. I have some people that are more lower socioeconomic background and other people that, like in COVID, moved from the city to Connecticut. I got a lot of people that would have been your patient. That difference between people that can't afford it and people that can't, to like shop around and do these other things, or even afford PGT, right?
100%.
Because even if you can maybe afford IVF, that doesn't mean you can afford to add on PGT.
Right, and that's what I remind a lot of my patients, because IVF kind of in theory, seems like, oh yeah, we'll just go do
that's
IVF.
An easy answer. Oh, we'll just do that.
Yes, we'll just do that, and all of our problems will disappear. And I do have to remind patients, like, yes, IVF is an option, which I'm so glad that we have, but it is a very long, tedious, and expensive option, and not even with PGT, right? Once you add on PGT, PGT-A, PGT-M, that can add on $10,000, $20,000 onto pregnancy. So it's not as accessible as it should be to patients who need it. But that's where our accessibility comes in, and the patients who have the means will find a way. And I think they also brought up I think the last presenter kind of brought up the kind of ghetto-ness of genetic conditions, where the patients who can will screen out, and the patients that can't will kind of have to deal with the consequences.
Every year that we progress becomes more and more like Gattaca. Did you ever watch the film Gattaca?
Gattaca is my favorite genetic movie.
Yes, amazing.
It's my favorite movie.
Yeah, a couple other students from our class, we like got together, watched Gattaca, and then
love Gattaca.
So that was fun, Ale and Catherine, and but yeah, it kind of is like that. It's like the people that can afford it will do these things. The people that can't are just rolling the dice with natural conception.
100%. And as we get into more of our regulated prenatal care in this country, then it also becomes sections of the country have more, so it's just...
I mean, I think just with the politics happening right now, IVF has been coming up a lot. I think it came up in the last debate.
Yes.
I mean, abortion certainly did, and it comes up every time, and that's the part of the debate that I shut my laptop and focus. All right, what are we saying here? Yep, because patients are going to bring it up, and obviously we're invested in our profession. Being able to hear what those conversations are like so that we can be reporting back to patients.
Kind of comes back into our PGTM conversation, where if the government is more so regulating IVF in this way, will they be the ones that put in the line in the sand of, this is something you can discard an embryo for?
Yep.
And if this is something that you can keep an embryo for. So that's also very interesting as well.
Yeah. And one thing with the UK I was really surprised by, which maybe other people knew this and I just somehow didn't come across it, that you cannot do what they call social sexing.
Yes.
Which is like, you can't say, all right, we're gonna look at the embryos, we're gonna look at the sex chromosomes and be like, this would develop into a baby that would be assigned male at birth, this one would be assigned female at birth, like, if there's not other genetic conditions behind it and everything. Yeah. So did you know that before?
I had no idea. A lot of...
Because we can do that in the U.S.
We
I've
can.
had patients that have done that.
Patients say, they print you out with your PGTA, right?
Yep.
They say you have
a normal euploid female embryo.
Right, you have 4 euploid females, you have 4 euploid males. Which one would you like us to transfer? Right?
Sure.
And, so
and some people are like, surprise me, like you're at a bar and you're
right,
like,
exactly,
surprise me
whatever,
with a drink,
I
right?
don't care.
I have lots of patients that do that. They're like, well, the lab knows, but we don't know. I'm like, oh, that's fun.
What's interesting is I have a couple patients that are like, we transferred a female embryo and we're pregnant with a boy. which
That's
also
a little scary.
gets
We're like, okay,
yeah, so
did
I'm
we
like,
transfer the right embryo?
I have to say, well, you know, that yes, we are a little concerned, but were you sexually active during this time? And typically
that's
they
the
say,
part.
yeah,
They're like, yeah,
I'm
because
like,
we're trying to conceive in any way possible. A lot of people
exactly. And I
experience
say,
infertility, so they're not going to stop trying in that way.
Yes, and I say, okay, maybe it's not really they transferred the wrong embryo. Let's not go through that. But maybe it's that you conceived naturally
That is
instead.
much more likely in today's day and age.
But yes, I thought the UK not telling sex of each embryo was very interesting. And I do really enjoy that concept a little bit because as they had the examples of each patient, yesterday there was a case where a couple had, I believe they had 4 boys that had a specific genetic condition.
Yeah, it was a condition that included deafness and infertility. I don't know if it was called deafness and fertility disorder.
Yeah, I think it's like
but it was something like that.
Syndrome or something like that. And they had 4 affected males. And they went through an IVF process again, and they had a couple of males, embryos unaffected, and 1 female affected. And the patient really wanted to transfer her female, even though it would have these genetic
And she had normal euploid male embryos to choose from.
Right. And
but they discarded them, remember?
Right. Their clinic said, no, we are not going to do that. We're not going to transfer your female that has these conditions. We have
because you have other
males.
options.
Exactly. And they said, no thanks. We're going to go to another clinic. And in that other clinic, they discarded all of their males and transferred that female anyway.
Yep. And they said that's what we're doing.
So I think that it comes into account in a lot of these situations about the male embryos and the female embryos and which one would complete a family, right? And I think that when we have a genetic condition in our family that can come with some symptoms, if we didn't tell this patient any of the sex of any of these embryos, and would have made that conversation a little bit easier, you know, that choice a little bit easier for the couple.
If they were not aware of the sex, because then you're like, okay, but then it comes into the conversation of having 4 boys with, I don't know what their level of deafness was. It was 1 slide, right? That we're talking about. So, but if they're a family that uses, over there, I guess it'd be BSL, British Sign Language. We would use ASL here. But there is such a culture around deafness and hearing loss, and there's so much that goes with that maybe that was part of their decision making. I'm sure families have been in that situation where maybe they're deaf themselves and they're like, we want to have a child like us. And this has been part of our community, and we want our child to grow up with this community and this sense of identity.
It could also be that they have 4 siblings that are hard of hearing or deaf, and they want another sibling that could kind of be in that pact and have that same life experience. So it comes into our discussion of choice, right?
And
because
should we be telling patients,
exactly.
I mean, we're not in fertility, but should we as healthcare providers be intercepting that and telling a couple, no, you have to implant a quote unquote normal embryo or is it an unaffected embryo of the condition that we were screening for? Because people might screen for it wanting that. And I think another example of that was achondroplasia. And there was a great breakfast too of a talk with BioMarin that talked about achondroplasia. And for those that don't remember, that's an autosomal dominant disorder. But if a couple both has achondroplasia and they get, I'm kind of thinking of like double dominant.
Yeah,
like
double
if they
dominant.
both get, if they get both mutated genes, then that is lethal. So a lot of couples are like, we want to make sure we're not implanting or conceiving naturally 100%. A baby that is inheriting both genes from us. But by doing that embryo screening, statistically, you'd have some normal that would not have achondroplasia and be normal stature or average height. But they might say, well, me and my partner are a little person, we have achondroplasia, and we want to have our child be in the same, they're another community, right? Little People of America, LPA is such a great organization.
100%.
So it's very similar.
Yeah, exactly. And it's tough because there are some clinics that say we would not transfer an embryo that we know has symptoms of achondroplasia with a short stature, so they would say no. Which, another thing about choice, right? Like who are we to say you can and cannot transfer this embryo or have a family that you choose?
Especially when the parent themselves has the condition we're talking about.
And
that is so different than saying to a couple or a person, right, to be inclusive of all different types of parents and family structures, that, we don't recommend, or we really don't feel comfortable transplanting embryo that is going to grow up to have Tay-Sachs. That to me is so different than someone that is going to have a relatively normal life.
Exactly, 100%. Especially when with a parent who has this condition,
Yes.
right? It's already
How can you look at them and say that?
I
That to
know.
me is mind-boggling.
I know, and already linked into the medical community with this condition, knows the greatest doctors in the community could really link this child.
They're
into
the
that
best
healthcare.
person to be a parent.
And I always tell my patients this. You know, there's a lot of conditions where there is no gene, like autoimmune conditions, right? And autism most of the time.
Oh, yeah,
and
that's a
so
big
I
one.
always say, you know, if a parent has a autoimmune, let's just say rheumatoid arthritis, right? I say I can't tell you that your baby will not have that when they grow up, but I say that this is the best parent structure to be born into because you have it and you would know those symptoms as well.
You're going to be the best advocate
You'll
for
be
your
the
kiddo.
best parent if you have
Exactly.
one. Exactly.
Yeah. Well, Joe, any closing thoughts? I mean, we could talk about fertility and PGA and PGTA, my goodness, and PGTM, PGTSR, all this. Anything you want to close out with?
I'd say that genetic counselors are so important in this space. I think that we are the ones that are having these kind of tough talks about choice and who are the people that put those guidelines into place. I think that it's definitely an ongoing conversation, but I think the person in the room should be a genetic counselor.
Yeah,
to
definitely.
have these conversations.
To be part of the conversation, definitely.
Yes,
and
yes.
be part of some of these regulations.
100%.
Because maybe and I don't know, so I'm starting to say things I don't know, which is always a scary thought. But I'm imagining there weren't a lot of genetic counselors, maybe one, that were involved in writing some of these regulations in the UK.
Mm-hmm.
And if there was more involved, would it be such gray language with a serious condition and all that?
Right.
So I think if in the US this progresses in terms of us looking at the UK and other countries, they focus on the UK because there was someone that actually flew here from the UK to speak.
Mm-hmm.
I'm pretty sure they live in the UK,
Yes,
right?
they
had
do.
a beautiful accent.
Yes, I know.
So it's pretty obvious. But that we should be looking at other countries in ways that they've done it well, in ways that they could have maybe done things better, and learning from them.
Yeah, it's great to have a kind of guideline that's already in place in other countries.
A
So we
role
can
model.
take what we would
Yep.
want and leave what we don't.
Yeah.
And kind of go from there.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much, Joe,
Thank
for
you for
finding
having
a
me.
semi-quiet corner. Thank you, everybody, for putting up with any background noise going on. But thank you so much,
No
Joe.
problem. Thanks, Kira, for having me.
For more information about today's episode, visit dnatoday.com, or you can also stream all 200 plus episodes of the show, including video versions of interviews recorded in 2021 or later. Any questions, episode ideas, guest pitches, or sponsor inquiries can be sent into info@dnatoday.com. Be sure to follow us on social media, especially so you don't miss a giveaway. We are at DNA Today Podcast on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, and more. Please rate and review the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen. This truly helps us climb the charts and allow more genetic nerds like yourself to find the show. Here's a bonus. If you do and send us a screenshot, I'll give you a shout out on the show. DNA Today is created, hosted, and produced by myself, Kira Deneen. Our team includes communications lead, Corinne Merlino, video lead, Amanda Andrioli, outreach intern, Sonia Tanaiker, social media intern, Kajal Patel, and graphic designer, Ashlyn Anokian. Thanks for listening, and join us next time to discover new advances in the world of genetics.
The genes of you and me, the genes of you, and we're all made of DNA. We're all made of the same chemical DNA. We're all made of